Crime Tuesday. This is Odin, my new friend. Who are we going to talk about today, Odin? He's like, I don't care, just give me a cookie. So yeah, this is the new puppy. That's the other puppy. They love each other very much. This is Detroit Allycat. I'm so happy to have you back. Welcome back to my channel. I have a really fun case for us today. It's kind of nice because it's not your typical Detroit Allycat case where I do like this whole thing and then afterwards I cry and then you cry and it's just a whole thing. Today we're going to talk about Arne Johnson. And you might have heard of Arne Johnson because it's a very popular topic right now and one that I'm going to discuss further this week. But the reason why it's so popular is because the Conjuring 3 movie just came out and they did a whole thing about this case. And the name of this case and Conjuring 3 movie is The Devil Made Me Do It. And the actual case itself was called The Devil Made Me Do It case. It was the first known court case where the defense actually used demonic possession as a reason for why the defendant needed to get off. And Arne Johnson, by all counts, provided proof and evidence that he had been possessed by a demon. And he did indeed go to court and he tried to use this defense. Unfortunately, it did not work. He ended up getting charged for manslaughter. But the interesting thing about this is that he got 15 to 20 years, but then he was let out 5 years after he was put into prison. So let's go ahead and talk about this case because it's cool. I think it's cool. It all began with a family called the Glitzel family. The Glitzel family had 3 kids and there were 2 adults. There was Carl Sr. who was married to Judy. They had a child. His name was David. Then there was Carl Jr. And then of course there was Debbie. And Debbie was the oldest and she was married to Arne. And according to the Glitzel family, their son, 11-year-old David Glitzel, was possessed by a demon. The Glitzels called Ed and Lorraine Warren, which is a very popular couple. They are known as paranormal investigators, they are known as demonologists, occultists. So the reason that Ed and Lorraine Warren are so popular right now and they're in the spotlight is there were a bunch of movies that came out were the Conjuring series, and it's like almost now it's the Conjuring universe. They have 1, 2, and 3, and basically they talk about all the different cases that Ed and Lorraine went to, some of the most famous cases. And today we're going to talk about the Arne Johnson case. They were called in by the parents, the Glitzels, and they were basically asked to check out what was going on with the youngest, which is David Glitzel. They went and investigated to see what was happening there, and they determined that the church needed to intervene. And the neat thing about Lorraine and Ed is they actually got hired quite often by the church to investigate different kind of occult activity or demonic possession and tell the church what they thought about all this. And so they had determined that this family was deeply in need of an exorcism. During the exorcism was particularly grueling, and David was laid out on the table and he was actually like, you know, going through whatever you go through during an exorcism. It was really hard, and Arne ended up screaming, "No, take me, leave the boy and take me," or something like that to that effect. And Ed and Lorraine would later testify that they actually saw the demon leave David and jump into Arne. The events are documented in a book called Devil in Connecticut by Gerald Brittle. Several months later, Arne would end up killing his landlord. Arne was convicted of first-degree manslaughter, 10 to 20. He only served 5 years. The story was made into the popular film that we know right now, called The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, 2021. Arne Johnson and Debbie Glitzel, David's older sister, were engaged when this actually happened. They both agree that paranormal activity was occurring when Arne ended up killing his landlord, and Debbie and Arne are not very religious people. They didn't really believe that, like, in possessions or demons or angels, but they definitely did believe that something was happening at the house that they stayed in, and there was a lot of activity going on. So it all began when they first moved into this rental house, and David, the 11-year-old, he was supposed to clean his room, and said a old man started pushing him around and kind of like yelling at him and growling at him, and it really scared David. And David came and he told Debbie about it, and Debbie said that she just thought that he probably didn't want to clean his room, and that is why he said that there was an old man in there. But more and more, little David seemed to be getting tortured. He'd have scratches on his arms. He really looked like he was messed up by something. They couldn't explain it. And that's Arne and Debbie actually lived above Debbie's parents in a rental property, the one that they moved into, and they had like their own little apartment or whatever, and that's actually why they knew so much about what was going on with David, is because they lived right above them. After the exorcism occurred, the Glitzel family, they just wanted to leave the rental property. They felt like there was something evil about the rental property, and they didn't feel comfortable there, so they ended up moving out. Arne and Debbie actually moved too, and Debbie was hired by this man. His name was Alan Bono. And Alan Bono actually owned a dog grooming company, and Debbie was hired to work for the as a dog groomer, and like they babysat the dogs, they took care of the dogs. Alan Bono actually also had some properties very close by, and Arne and Debbie ended up renting an actual property from Alan Bono. Right around this time, Arne started to begin acting very strange. Debbie would say that he would growl, he would start talking to himself, he had scratch marks all over his body, just like the same thing that little David had that was inflicting him with. Arne began speaking Latin sometimes, and that was very strange because Arne did not speak Latin, and so, his fiance was really freaked out by the whole mumbling of Latin. February 16th, 1981, Arne called in sick from the right tree service that he actually worked at. He went to go visit Debbie at her dog grooming job, and with him was his sister Wanda and Debbie's 9-year-old cousin Mary. When they got there, Alan Bono was actually there, and he was drinking. He was drinking very heavily, and they all decided that they were going to go out and have pizza. So Alan stayed at the property, and Debbie took the girls, and she also went with Arne to go get pizza. But she had a very bad feeling, so they rushed back to the dog grooming site. And at which point, Alan Bono started getting very, very agitated and upset. Just like, how people do when they're drinking heavily and they start to get very upset for no reason. And at which point Alan Bono ended up grabbing the little girl, the 9-year-old little girl, Mary, and he grabbed her arm. And Arne noticed this immediately, and he turned around and he told him to let go of the girl, and he wouldn't. And all of a sudden, Arne started mumbling and growling, and he was acting like he was possessed, like all the other times that he had been alone with Debbie. And he started doing all of these things again. Arne and Bono ended up getting into a fight. Arne ended up taking out a blade that he had on him, and he took the blade and he ended up stabbing Alan Bono 4 or 5 different times. And I guess it was particularly gruesome because some of the Some of the stab marks started at the chest and they ripped all the way down to the stomach. And at that point, Debbie ended up grabbing the girls, calling the police. When the police came, they found Arne about 2 miles away, and he just cooperated with the police and they took him away. When they arrested Arne, Lorraine ended up telling the police that Arne was actually possessed by a demon. At this time, when the case happened, Bono had been stabbed by Arne and was claiming that he was possessed by a demon. There was a huge media circle. They were hanging out by the jail, they were hanging out by the courthouse. Anything that happened, there were reporters there, and of course everyone's really interested because you have this case where somebody's saying that they were possessed by a actual demon, and that's why he ended up killing Debbie's landlord and boss. Of course, it had nothing to do with the fact that he had a 9-year-old little girl that was a family member of theirs and he wouldn't let her go and he was heavily intoxicated. The demon told Arne to kill Bono. Just reiterating what's already known. When the media started circling this case, it became known as the Demon Murder Trial. The trial started October 28th, 1981. After they came up with the demon possession defense and it wasn't seeming to go very well, his defense ended up switching and they actually said that it was self-defense. So in the beginning they started saying that Arne was possessed by a demon, but it actually turned out that they presented the evidence that Arne was acting in self-defense, and that's why he actually ended up stabbing Bono. Now later on there was a whole bunch of people that kind of followed and stalked this family, and Carl Jr. ended up getting really upset and he felt like his life was completely destroyed by everything that happened, and he came clean in an interview and actually said that Ed and Lorraine told them to make up the entire story. He said that Ed and Lorraine said that if they talked about how Arne was possessed by a demon, they would end up making millions and he would end up getting off. We don't actually know if this is the truth, but this is what Carl Jr. said. Now, what's kind of a big coincidence is that Carl Sr. was also interviewed about this case, and he ended up saying his son was never possessed. I don't know how that happened, but at the time he let the church do an exorcism, and Carl Jr. actually ended up saying that his brother David was mentally ill and that was what was wrong with him. So we don't really know what the truth is, but there is the whole thing where the families ended up coming out and saying this isn't what really happened. We don't know. They might have just been saying that because they were embarrassed. Arne and Debbie ended up getting married and they stayed together the entire time that Arne was in prison, which was only 5 years, because Arne ended up doing only 5 years because of good behavior, which I think is really crazy, to be honest with you, because he stabbed a man to death and then he said he did it because the devil made him do it, and then they let him out 5 years later. I think they should be just a tiny bit worried that something like that would happen again, but it never happened again, and Debbie and Arne ended up getting married right after he got out of prison. And what's really sad is that this year, 2021, Debbie ended up actually passing away. I just really wanted to jump into that case because I thought it was a really cool case, and I ended up watching the movie and I wanted to know the truth. And what I kind of picked apart from this, and this is just going to be my speculation, is, we don't really know. Ed and Lorraine really intrigued me. I can't figure out if they did these cases for media coverage or to become kind of a rock star, or they really were people that believed in what they were doing. Do I believe in the paranormal? Absolutely. Do I think that Arne was possessed by a demon and that's why he ended up stabbing Alan Bono? I don't know. I think it's a very strange coincidence that Ellen Bono had Debbie's 9-year-old cousin, and he was hanging on to her, and he was really wasted, and all of a sudden, like clockwork, Arne becomes possessed by the demon and decides that he's gonna stab this man to death. I mean, honestly, do demons work that way? You can call upon them when you have a physical altercation with somebody? I don't think so. So the case is very intriguing to me because I really don't know what the truth is. And I do think the one thing that was kind of upsetting about this case is that somebody was convicted of first-degree manslaughter, and they stabbed the man to death, even though this man was not acting appropriate. But that's according to Debbie and Arne, who also said that Arne was possessed by a demon. He ended up only getting 5 years for a pretty gruesome crime, and I think that's kind of disappointing personally. But like I said, the case really intrigued me. I'd love to hear what you think about the case. I am going to actually do a review about The Conjuring, and then after that, I'm gonna end up doing Ed and Lorraine for my Paranormal Saturday, Spooky Saturday series, and I thought that would be a lot of fun. And I'm hoping that, you know, with my new puppies, that I actually get to go through with it. I really appreciate you watching this video. If you stuck with me through this whole time, give me a thumbs up if you liked it. Tell me what you thought. Give me some constructive criticism. I really love to hear from you guys. Thank you so much for watching. As always, stay spooky and stay safe. Bye.